From MTN News, this is Montana This Morning.
Good Friday morning. It's 4:30. Welcome to Montana This Morning. I'm Victoria Hill. Thank you so much for getting your day started with us today.
And I'm Ed McIntosh as we're off and going on really cold temperatures, record-setting cold, and then the snow on top of it. A lot of heavy snow possible as we move in towards tomorrow. Starting off with the first interstate ICAM at only 14 degrees and a south breeze at 3 miles per hour. We have to keep reminding ourselves exactly what time of the year this is. Yesterday, we hit a high only at 30 degrees. You check it out, 27 degrees colder than the average, 50 degrees colder than the record high for the date, even though that the overnight low and the low yesterday tied the record for the date as well. So we picked up additional snowfall yesterday. That's another almost 3 inches officially at the airport. So that pushes us to almost 15 inches of snow for the month. And we're going to look at a lot more through the weekend, especially as we head into tomorrow. Today, it's mainly about how cold it is. Check out -3 in Glasgow, 0 in Havre this morning, single digits all across the eastern plains. Sheridan, you're at 6, 9 in Miles City, 1 degree right now being reported from Cody, and 11 for you in Livingston. This just doesn't seem to fit. Temperatures around the region are mainly into the single digits and teens, a couple of low 20s. Roundup, your report was 20 degrees here a couple of minutes ago, so we're going to vacation up in Roundup here as we get through the day. Temperatures are going to warm only to the 20s throughout the day today, but the clouds increase, and that brings in snow. That's our next concern, and we'll talk about that coming up a little bit.
Yeah, it's a concern at my house too, because when it snowed last weekend, my 4-year-old insisted that we skip Halloween and go straight to Christmas. She started taking down all the Halloween window clings, and we had to explain to her, just because there's snow doesn't mean Halloween's not going to happen, and you're not getting your gifts anytime sooner. So. Yep. More explaining to do.
Move that up. I kind of like the logic for a 4-year-old. That works.
Yeah, it does work. Yeah. All right, Ed. Well, I do have some news, so I'll get to it. Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Our top story this morning, it was a more traditional debate between President Trump and Democrat nominee Joe Biden last night. After a chaotic first debate, each candidate had his mic cut off for the first 2 minutes of each topic. CBS's Natalie Brand brings us some of the big takeaways from the evening.
The final presidential debate of 2020 started off with the coronavirus.
We're learning to live with it. People are learning to die with it.
As the virus has killed more than 220,000 Americans, former Vice President Joe Biden has made the pandemic the central focus of his campaign against President Trump.
Anyone who's responsible for that many deaths should not remain as President of the United States of America. We closed up the greatest economy in the world in order to fight this horrible disease that came from China.
Later, the candidates clashed over health care.
What I'm going to do is pass Obamacare with a public option. It'll become Biden care. I'd like to terminate Obamacare, come up with a brand new, beautiful health care.
Moderator Kristen Welker also asked the two men about racial inequality in America.
The exception of Abraham Lincoln, nobody has done what I've done. Criminal justice reform, Obama and Joe didn't do it. Abraham Lincoln here is one of the most racist presidents we've had in modern history.
On the topic of climate change, Biden says he wants to move away from fossil fuels.
Because it has to be replaced by renewable energy over time. Will you remember that, Texas? Will you remember that, Pennsylvania?
President Trump made his closing argument about the economy, while the former vice president said the character of the country is on the ballot.
Success is going to bring us together. We're going to choose hope over fear.
With just 11 days until Election Day, 47 million Americans have already voted. Natalie Brand, CBS News, Nashville.
And today, the president is back on the campaign trail with rallies in Florida. Biden has an event in his home state of Delaware. The FDA has approved remdesivir, an antiviral drug for the treatment of COVID-19. According to a study by the U.S. National Institutes of Health, the drug cut the time of recovery by an average of 5 days. It was one of the experimental emergency use only treatments President Trump received when he was infected with the virus this month. Remdesivir is now the first and only approved COVID-19 treatment in the U.S. The announcement of a new treatment comes as welcome news after more than 1,100 COVID-19 related deaths in the U.S. on Wednesday. It was the first time in nearly a month fatalities rose above 1,000. The number of confirmed cases in the country is doubling roughly every 3 months. Now, the White House's coronavirus task force is warning about surges in areas like the Sun Belt, the Midwest, and northern states. Closer to home, Yellowstone County is again strengthening its response to the COVID-19 pandemic, now with some help from the state and the creation of new jobs. Governor Steve Bullock was in Billings yesterday and announced he will direct federal funds to the county to hire 4 COVID education liaison officers. Their job will be to investigate any violations and make sure businesses are following the rules. County officials say the complaints have been piling up.
If they do validate the complaint, the business, individual, or organization in violation would receive education about compliance expectations and guidance on how to demonstrate compliance. That business, individual, or organization will also be informed that an unannounced follow-up visit will occur. If a second visit validates the complaint again, evidence gathered by the liaisons would be turned over to the county attorney's office and to me as county health officer.
If it gets to that point, Felton said it could result in criminal charges and warned he has the power to close a building down. Red Lodge police are asking for help finding a missing woman. Amy Markell is from the Red Lodge area and was last seen on Sunday, October 18th. If you have any information on her whereabouts, you are asked to call the Red Lodge Police Department. That number is 446-1234. Now we go to Wyoming, where a man facing federal charges for digging in the historic Fort Yellowstone Cemetery says he did it looking for Forrest Finn's treasure. Roderick Craythorne was indicted on charges of excavating or trafficking in archaeological resources, along with damaging U.S. property. Investigators say he dug in the cemetery between October 2019 and May 2020. The Forrest Finn treasure started a decade-long search and was finally located in Wyoming in June of this year. Craythorne's trial is set for December 14th. Now we go to Butte, where a search and rescue team endured freezing temperatures and rough terrain to rescue a woman in her 60s. MTN's John Amy spoke with one of the men who likely saved her life.
With snow falling and sub-freezing temperatures dropping, the search for a 66-year-old woman who got lost in a densely wooded area south of Butte was becoming more desperate as the hours passed.
But if we didn't find her that night, we didn't think we would find her alive in the morning.
Members of Butte's 1590 Search and Rescue began looking for the woman about 8 o'clock in the evening Wednesday after a couple went hiking earlier that afternoon and got separated in a wooded area off of Roosevelt Drive. The husband called 911 after he couldn't find his wife and their 2 dogs.
She was woefully unprepared for this kind of weather. No matches, no fire, no flashlight. She lost her phone during the time she was lost.
A team of 35 searchers combed through rough terrain in freezing temperatures and falling snow. It wasn't until about 3 o'clock in the morning the next day they heard the dogs barking and found her sitting on a log.
She was very, very cold. I think she got a lot of support from the 2 dogs she had with her.
So this is the kind of challenging terrain that the search and rescue team was dealing with. They were crawling under all sorts of deadfall, negotiating around boulders on this very unstable terrain. All of this while it was snowing and in complete darkness.
The guys, the younger guys who were doing the hard work and the working, were telling me that this was the most physical exertion they'd ever seen on a search or a hunting party.
In Butte, John Amy, MTN News.
John also tells us the woman was treated at the hospital, and Belkey says she seems to be recovering well. In campaign news, the Montana Supreme Court won't hear a challenge hoping to remove a marijuana legalization initiative from the general election ballot. Wrong for Montana. The committee opposing the legalization effort says the initiative is unconstitutional because it attempts to appropriate state money through a ballot measure. But the High Court said there's no reason the challenge shouldn't go to a lower court first. Wrong for Montana will now refile in district court. If marijuana legalization is passed, it would include a 20% sales tax. That money would then be redirected to conservation efforts, veteran services, and substance abuse treatment. Also making headlines this morning, Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee voted to send Judge Amy Coney Barrett's Supreme Court nomination to the full Senate. Democrats on the committee walked out in protest. In their seats, they left posters of Americans they say stand to lose coverage if Obamacare is struck down by a more conservative court. This weekend, the Senate will convene in a rare session to ensure Barrett gets to the Supreme Court before Election Day. A judge has dropped a lesser third-degree murder charge against the former Minneapolis police officer accused in the death of George Floyd, but the judge upheld the higher charges of second-degree unintentional murder and second-degree manslaughter against Derek Chauvin. The judge also upheld the charges of aiding and abetting against the other 3 former officers charged in the case. As a precaution against any unrest in response to the judge's decision, Minnesota's governor has activated the state National Guard to help maintain order. Back here in Billings, a doctor came out of retirement to provide relief for the critical care physicians treating COVID-19 patients. But as Q2's David J. reports, before she could help here, a need came up in New York.
Dr. Chris Spanjan came out of retirement to help COVID-19 patients.
All my life, my whole career was dedicated to helping others. And just because you retire, that part of you doesn't go away. And even though I hadn't been in the trenches for a couple years, I figured I could get back on that horse and ride again a little bit.
In May, she worked for about 2.5 weeks at New York University Langone Health's Tisch Hospital and Kimmel Pavilion.
This is really something different than any of us had ever seen. I've been in practice for over 30 years. A lot of people get bacterial infections or even fungal infections. Because their body is so weakened and they're in the ICU for a long time. So there are these other bacterial pneumonias that can come on top of the virus pneumonia.
She also has seen the emotional effects.
The other thing was the isolation problem with patients and their families. Families aren't allowed in.
And the people in New York appreciate the hospital workers.
The whole community around the hospital would celebrate at that time, as the shift was going off and other people were coming on, just to show the support.
And she's confident Billings doctors and nurses are prepared.
The group at St. Vincent's, and I'm sure Billings Clinic is the same way, and Riverstone Health are all working together. We do have the personnel here that I think is just as good and as experienced as it was in New York City.
In Billings, David J., MTN News.
Dr. Spanjan doesn't know how much longer she'll work, but plans on being available for as long as she's needed.